Mrs. Ryan went to the door to greet the parents. She scheduled conferences ahead of time, and that's part of the preparation. She had scheduled times, but I would advise some teachers who do not schedule conferences, who just have a certain block of time that's set aside and parents may show up, to have a sign-in sheet so that parents are called in the order in which they arrive, so no parent is left there waiting for any great length of time. Mrs. Ryan advised her parents that conferences would be approximately 15 minutes long. And if you notice during her conference, she did say that she had some things to further discuss with Mrs. Savona, but they were going to discuss it at a later time.
And let's set up an appointment time where we can talk again.
And she did set up another appointment because she wanted to make sure that she adhered to her schedule and didn't leave any parent out there for an unnecessary amount of time. Parents have the opportunity as they're sitting there to look at some of the materials, which is good. Mrs. Ryan made sure that as she greeted the parent at the door that she closed the door because confidentiality is an issue, and we want to make sure that parents feel free to talk in an environment that's risk-free. You can notice that there was also a lot of preparation in that Mrs. Ryan has folders, portfolios for every student. She has actual work that the students have accomplished in that portfolio. She also has anecdotal records. She has maintained a file of communications with the parent. She has dates and what they discussed during those communications so she can refer back to them. She may have in that file any parent notes that the parent sent in and any questions that she might want to include in the conference. One of the good things to do, or one of the recommended things to do in preparation for a parent conference, is to send home a sheet asking parents about some of the questions that they have or some of the things that they're concerned about with their child, so that the teacher can sort of get a heads up on what to expect during that conference and can address those issues before the conference actually takes place. When the parent comes in, they can discuss that together. Mrs. Ryan has a wonderful setting for the conference to take place. Again, she has adult chairs. She's not sitting behind her desk. There's no barrier between her and the parent. They are sitting near each other, not across the table from each other. And she has lots of visuals for the parent to see even during the conference. Before the conference actually begins, the teacher needs to think, what are the objectives for this conference? Whether it be based on teacher observation of the child, some of the concerns that maybe the parent may have sent in, or in a preliminary sheet where she asked for information. So she's going to go into this conference thinking about, I need to set some goals for this child and work with the parent to determine what those goals are and how we can mutually achieve those goals. Another preparation item might be to even prepare students for these conferences. Explain to students what they're all about and what you and the parents will be discussing, because later on you might want to bring the student into some of those objectives and goals that you may have set for that child. The child certainly should be aware of those things. Now, if you look actually during the conference, Mrs. Ryan welcomed the parent and really started to establish some rapport with that parent immediately when she talked about her baking and sharing a piece of herself with the parent. And that's really critical. You could begin by asking something about the parent's work or their hobbies or their interests. You want to make sure that at the beginning of the conference you state the purpose for the conference and how much time you're going to have available for the conference. And you could even encourage the parent to take some notes and to ask questions during the conference. Mrs. Ryan opened the conference with Mrs. Savona with a positive attribute about the student.
He's making very good progress. Jonathan gets along with all of his classmates.
You want to make sure that you then begin by describing the child's progress and focusing on the major subject areas and what has been learned since school has started. You want to be precise and make sure that you're jargon-free. You don't want to use terms that the parent will not understand. And if the parent, and ask for clarification. Would you like me to clarify this? Do you understand? I think at one point Mrs. Ryan talked about decoding skills, and then she proceeded to explain to Mrs. Savona what was actually meant by decoding skills. I'll ask the parent again how they feel about their child's progress, okay? And listen for any areas of expectations or frustration.
Looking at this D he has in math computation skills, and I'm very concerned about.
And at this point, you want to set some mutual goals. Okay? If math computation is a problem, what are the goals? How can we help Jonathan to succeed in this area, and work together as a team to set those goals? Ongoing, you want to make sure that you ask parents for an understanding and for any concerns as you go along. And you want to make sure that everybody understands their role in terms of the goals. This is how I'm going to address this problem. This is what you can do. And if you notice, Mrs. Ryan gave Mrs. Savona a list of suggestions that she could take home.
Again, I have listed some suggestions, which I'm going to send you off with before you leave.
To assist her in dealing with the math computation problem with Jonathan. In terms of setting goals for the child, you want to make sure that you establish a timeline. I believe that Mrs. Ryan said to Mrs. Savona, we will talk again in 2 weeks, so the parent knows exactly how much time will be between this conference and the next conference, and she will then get a report as to how the student is doing within that 2 weeks. At the end of the conference, you want to make sure that you summarize so that the parent, you really know that the parent has an understanding of what has happened and what is going to happen in terms of the child's achievement, and indicate that you will be following up, when you will be following up, and make sure that, of course, that you thank the parent for coming. Now that the conference officially is over, your work isn't over, because what you need to do is you need to do some follow-up. Right after the conference ends, if you can find a couple of minutes to jot down some notes about what happened in the conference, some anecdotal record of what goals you mutually set, maybe some things that you might want to discuss with the child or with the parent at a future date. This is a good time to do this. Evaluate the conference. You might want to ask the parent to evaluate the conference by sending home some type of evaluation sheet the next day. And really sit and do some self-assessment. You know, ask yourself, how did this conference go? And maybe evaluate in terms of, you know, what could I have done differently, or maybe what do I want to address next time, or what do I want to do differently. I think it's important too that the next day, especially if you have set some specific goals for the child, the very next day you might want to meet with that child. So Mrs. Ryan might want to meet with Jonathan and say, you know, Jonathan, Mom and I discussed this math grade, but you know what, we're going to work on it together, and this is what we're going to do, so that Jonathan can buy into what's happening. And then, at least within a few days, you want to do some kind of follow-up, whether it's a note home thanking the parent for attending, and on that simple note, it could just say, now remember, this is the mutual goal that we have set up, and I will talk to you again in 2 weeks, or we will have a phone conference in 2 weeks. And of course, you know, make adjustments as you go along, because nothing ever really goes the way we expect at all times. And then also in that note, you want to make sure that you encourage the parent to follow through on his or her commitment to whatever goals that you have decided for this child.